Eight Cousins by Louisa May Alcott. Read by Bonnie Erickson. Chapter 2. The Clan. Rose scrambled into the china closet as rapidly as possible, and there refreshed herself by making faces at Debbie, while she settled her plumage and screwed up her courage. Then she crept softly down the hall and peeped into the parlor. No one appeared, and all was so still she felt sure the company was upstairs. So she skipped boldly through the half-open folding doors to behold, on the other side, a sight that nearly took her breath away. 7 boys stood in a row, all ages, all sizes, all yellow-haired and blue-eyed, all in full Scotch costume, and smiling, nodding, and saying with one voice, "How are you, cousin?" Rose gave a little gasp, and looked wildly about her as if ready to fly, for fear magnified the 7, and the room seemed full of boys. Before she could run, however, the tallest lad stepped out of line, saying pleasantly, "Don't be frightened. This is the clan come to welcome you, and I'm the chief, Archie, at your service." He held out his hand as he spoke, and Rose timidly put her own into a brown paw, which closed over the white morsel, and held it as the chief continued his introductions. "We come in full rig, for we always turn out in style on grand occasions. Hope you like it. Now I'll tell you who these chaps are, and then we shall be all right. This big one is Prince Charlie, Aunt Clara's boy. She has but one, so he is an extra good one. This old fellow is Mac, the bookworm, called Worm for short. This sweet creature is Steve the dandy. Look at his gloves and topknot, if you please. They are Aunt Jane's lads, and a precious pair, you'd better believe. These are the brats, my brothers Geordie and Will, and Jamie the baby. Now, my men, step out and show your manners." At this command, to Rose's great dismay, 6 more hands were offered, and it was evident that she was expected to shake them all. It was a trying moment to the bashful child, but remembering that they were her kinsmen come to welcome her, she tried her best to return the greeting cordially. This impressive ceremony being over, the clan broke ranks, and both rooms instantly appeared to be pervaded with boys. Rose hastily retired to the shelter of a big chair and sat there watching the invaders, and wondering when her aunt would come and rescue her. As if bound to do their duty manfully, yet rather oppressed by it, each lad paused beside her chair in his wanderings, made a brief remark, received a still briefer answer, and then sheered off with a relieved expression. Archie came first, and leaning over the chair back, observed in a paternal tone, "I'm glad you've come, cousin, and I hope you'll find the ant-hill pretty jolly." "I think I shall." Mac shook his hair out of his eyes, stumbled over a stool, and asked abruptly, "Did you bring any books with you?" "4 boxes full. They are in the library." Mac vanished from the room, and Steve, striking an attitude which displayed his costume effectively, said with an affable smile, "We were sorry not to see you last Wednesday. I hope your cold is better." "Yes, thank you," and a smile began to dimple about Rose's mouth as she remembered her retreat under the bed cover. Feeling that he had been received with distinguished marks of attention, Steve strolled away with his top knot higher than ever, and Prince Charlie pranced across the room, saying, in a free and easy tone, "Mamma sent her love, and hopes you will be well enough to come over for a day next week. It must be desperately dull here for a little thing like you." "I'm 13 and a half, though I do look small," cried Rose, forgetting her shyness in indignation at this insult to her newly acquired teens. "Beg pardon, ma'am. Never should have guessed it." And Charlie went off with a laugh, glad to have struck a spark out of his meek cousin. Geordie and Will came together, 2 sturdy 11 and 12-year-olders, and fixing their round blue eyes on Rose, fired off a question apiece, as if it were a shooting match, and she the target. "Did you bring your monkey?" "No, he is dead." "Are you going to have a boat?" "I hope not." Here the 2, with a right-about-face movement, abruptly marched away, and little Jamie demanded with childish frankness, Did you bring me anything nice?" "Yes, lots "Of candy," answered Rose, whereupon Jamie ascended into her lap with a sounding kiss and the announcement that he liked her very much. This proceeding rather startled Rose, for the other lads looked and laughed, and in her confusion she said hastily to the younger usurper, "Did you see the circus go by?" "When? Where?" cried all the boys in great excitement at once. "Just before you came. At least I thought it was a circus, for I saw a red and black sort of cart, and ever so many little ponies, and—" She got no further, for a general shout made her pause suddenly, as Archie explained the joke by saying in the middle of his laugh, "It was our new dog cart, and the Shetland ponies. You'll never hear the last of your circus, cousin." "But there were so many, and they went so fast, and the cart was so very red," began Rose, trying to explain her mistake. "Come and see them all," cried the prince, and before she knew what was happening she was borne away to the barn and tumultuously introduced to 3 shaggy ponies and the gay new dog-cart. She had never visited these regions before, and had her doubts as to the propriety of her being there now, but when she suggested that Auntie might not like it, there was a general cry of, "She told us to amuse you, and we can do it ever so much better out here than poking around in the house." "I'm afraid I shall get cold without my sack," began Rose, who wanted to stay, but felt rather out of her element. "No, you won't. We'll fix you," cried the lads, as one clapped his cap on her head, another tied a rough jacket round her neck by the sleeves, a third nearly smothered her in a carriage blanket, and a fourth threw open the door of the old barouche that stood there, saying with a flourish, "Step in, ma'am, and make yourself comfortable, while we show you some fun." So Rose sat in state, enjoying herself very much, for the lads proceeded to dance a Highland fling, with a spirit and skill that made her clap her hands and laugh as she had not done for weeks. "How is that, my lassie?" asked the prince, coming up all flushed and breathless when the ballet was over. "It was splendid. I never went to the theatre but once, and the dancing was not half so pretty as this. What clever boys you must be," said Rose, smiling upon her kinsmen like a little queen upon her subjects. "Ah, we're a fine lot, and that is only the beginning of our larks. We haven't got the pipes here, or we'd sing for you and play for you a dolce medley," answered Charlie, looking much elated at her praise. "I did not know we were Scotch. Papa never said anything about it, or seemed to care about Scotland, except to have me sing the old ballads," said Rose, beginning to feel as if she had left America behind her somewhere. "Neither did we, till lately. We've been reading Scott's novels, and all of a sudden we remembered that our grandfather was a Scotchman. So we hunted up the old stories, got a bagpipe, put on our plaids, and went in, heart and soul, for the glory of the clan. We've been at it for some time now, and it's great fun. Our people like it, and I think we are pretty canny set." Archie said this from the other coach step where he had perched while the rest climbed up before and behind to join in the chat as they rested. "I'm Fitzjames, and he's Roderick Dhu, and we'll give you the broadsword combat some day. It's a great thing, you'd better believe," added the prince. "Yes, and you should hear Steve play the pipes. He makes 'em squirrel like a good one," cried Will from the box, eager to air the accomplishments of his race. "Mac's the fellow to hunt up the old stories and tell us how to dress right, and pick out rousing bits for us to speak and sing," put in Geordie, saying a good word for the absent worm. "And what do you and Will do?" asked Rose of Jamie, who sat beside her, as if bound to keep her in sight till the promised gift had been handed over. "Oh, I'm the little foot-page and do errands, and Will and Geordie are the troops when we march, and the stags when we hunt, and the traitors when we want to cut any heads off." "They are very obliging, I'm sure," said Rose, whereat the utility men beamed with modest pride, and resolved to enact Wallace and Montrose as soon as possible for their cousin's special benefit. "Let's have a game of tag," cried the prince, swinging himself up to a beam with a sounding slap on Stevie's shoulder. Regardless of his gloves, Dandy tore after him, and the rest swarmed in every direction as if bent on breaking their necks and dislocating their joints as rapidly as possible. It was a new and astonishing spectacle to Rose, fresh from a prim boarding school, and she watched the active lads with breathless interest, thinking their antics far superior to those of Mops, the dear departed monkey. Will had just covered himself with glory by pitching off a high loft head first and coming up all right when Phoebe appeared with a cloak, hood, and rubbers, also a message from Aunt Plenty that Miss Rose wants to come in directly. "All right, we'll bring her," answered Archie, issuing some mysterious order which was so promptly obeyed that before Rose could get out of the carriage the boys had caught hold of the pole and rattled her out of the barn, round the oval and up the front door with a cheer that brought two caps to an upper window and caused Debbie to cry aloud from the back porch, "Them harum-scarum boys will certainly be the death of that delicate little critter." But the delicate little critter seemed the better for her trip, and ran up the steps, looking rosy, gay, and dishevelled, to be received with lamentations by Aunt Plenty, who begged her to go and lie down at once. "Oh, please don't! We have come to tea with our cousin, and we'll be as good as gold if you'll let us stay, Auntie," clamoured the boys, who had not only approved of our cousin, but had no mind to lose their tea, for Aunt Plenty's name but feebly expressed her bountiful nature. "Well, dears, you can. Only be quiet and let Rose go and take her iron and be made tidy, and then we will see what we can find for supper," said the old lady as she trotted away, followed by a volley of directions for the approaching feast. "Marmalade for me, Auntie. Plenty of plum cake, please. Tell Debbie to trot out the baked pears. I'm your man for lemon pie, ma'am. Do have fritters, Rose. Oh, do have fritters. Rose will like 'em. She'd rather have tarts, I know." When Rose came down 15 minutes later, with every curl smooth and her most beruffled apron on, she found the boys loafing about the long hall and paused on the halfway landing to take an observation, for till now she had not really examined her new-found cousins. There was a strong family resemblance among them, though some of the yellow heads were darker than others, some of the cheeks brown instead of rosy, and the ages varied all the way from 16-year-old Archie to Jamie, who was 10 years younger. None of them were especially comely but the prince, yet all were hearty, happy-looking lads, and Rose decided that boys were not as dreadful as she had expected to find them. They were all so characteristically employed that she could not help smiling as she looked. Archie and Charlie, evidently great cronies, were pacing up and down, shoulder to shoulder, whistling Bonnie Dundee. Mac was reading in a corner with his book close to his nearsighted eyes. Dandy was arranging his hair before the oval glass in the hat stand. Geordie and Will investigating the internal economy of the moon-faced clock, and Jamie lay kicking his heels on the mat at the foot of the stairs, bent on demanding his sweeties the instant Rose appeared. She guessed his intention and forestalled his demand by dropping a handful of sugar plums down upon him. At his cry of rapture the other lads looked up, smiled involuntarily, for the little kinswoman standing there above was a winsome sight, with her shy, soft eyes, bright hair, and laughing face. The black frock reminded them of her loss, and filled the boyish hearts with a kindly desire to be good to our cousin, who had no longer any home but this. "There she is, fine as you please," cried Steve, kissing his hand to her. "Come on, missy, tea is ready," added the prince, encouragingly. I shall take her in," and Archie offered his arm with great dignity and honor that made Rose turn as red as a cherry and long to run upstairs again. It was a merry supper, and the two elder boys added much to the fun by tormenting the rest with dark hints of some interesting event which was about to occur. Something uncommonly fine, they declared it was, but enveloped in the deepest mystery for the present. "Did I ever see it?" asked Jamie. "Not to remember it, but Mac and Steve have, and liked it immensely," answered Archie, thereby causing the two mentioned to neglect Debbie's delectable fritters for several minutes while they cudgelled their brains. "Who will have it first?" asked Will, with his mouth full of marmalade. "Aunt Plenty, I guess." "When will she have it?" demanded Geordie, bouncing in his seat with impatience. "Some time on Monday." "Heart alive! What is the boy talking about?" cried the old lady from behind the tall urn, which left little to be seen but the topmost bow of her cap. "Doesn't auntie know?" asked a chorus of voices. "No, and that's the best of the joke, for she is desperately fond of it." "What colour is it?" asked Rose, joining in the fun. "Blue and brown." "Is it good to eat?" asked Jamie. "Some people think so, but I shouldn't like to try it," answered Charlie, laughing so he spilt his tea. "Who does it belong to?" put in Steve. Archie and the prince stared at one another rather blankly for a minute. Then Archie answered with a twinkle of the eye that made Charlie explode again. "To Grandfather Campbell." This was a poser, and they gave up the puzzle, though Jamie confided to Rose that he did not think he could live till Monday without knowing what this remarkable thing was. Soon after tea, the clan departed singing "All the Blue Bonnets Are Over the Border" at the tops of their voices. "Well, dear, how do you like your cousins?" asked Aunt Plenty, as the last pony frisked round the corner and the din died away. "Pretty well, ma'am, but I like Phoebe better," an answer which caused Aunt Plenty to hold up her hands in despair and trot away to tell her sister Peace that she should never understand that child, and it was a mercy Alec was coming soon to take the responsibility off their hands. Fatigued by the unusual exertions of the afternoon, Rose curled herself up in the sofa corner to rest and think about the great mystery, little guessing that she was to know it first of all. Right in the middle of her meditations she fell asleep and dreamed she was at home again in her own little bed. She seemed to wake and see her father bending over her, to hear him say, "My little Rose," to answer, "Yes, Papa," and then to feel him take her in his arms and kiss her tenderly. So sweet, so real was the dream, that she started up with a cry of joy to find herself in the arms of a brown, bearded man, who held her close and whispered in a voice so like her father's, that she clung to him involuntarily. "This is my little girl, and I am Uncle Alec." 8 Cousins by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 3. Uncles. When Rose woke the next morning, she was not sure whether she had dreamed what occurred the night before, or it had actually happened, so she hopped up and dressed, although it was an hour earlier than she usually rose, for she could not sleep any more, being possessed with a strong desire to slip down and see if the big portmanteau and packing cases were really in the hall. She seemed to remember tumbling over them when she went to bed, for the aunts had sent her off very punctually, because they wanted their pet nephew all to themselves. The sun was shining, and Rose opened her window to let in the soft May air fresh from the sea. As she leaned over her little balcony, watching an early bird get the worm, and wondering how she would like Uncle Alec, she saw a man leap the garden wall and come whistling up the path. At first she thought it was some trespasser, but a second look showed her that it was her uncle returning from an early dip into the sea. She had hardly dared to look at him the night before, because whenever she tried to do so, she always found a pair of keen blue eyes looking at her. Now she could take a good stare at him as he lingered along, looking about him as if glad to see the old place again. A brown, breezy man, in a blue jacket with no hat on the curly head, which he shook now and then like a water-dog, broad-shouldered, alert in his motions, and with a general air of strength and stability about him, which pleased Rose, though she could not explain the feeling of comfort it gave her. She had just said to herself with a sense of relief, "I guess I shall like him, though he looks as if he's made people mind," when he lifted his eyes to examine the budding horse-chestnut overhead, and saw her eager face peering down at him. He waved his hand to her, nodded, and called out in a bluff, cheery voice, "You are on deck early, little niece." "I got up to see if you had really come, uncle." "Did you? Well, come down here and make sure of it." "I'm not allowed to go out before breakfast, sir." "Oh, indeed!" With a shrug. "Then I'll come aboard and salute," he added, and to Rose's great amazement, Uncle Alec went up one of the pillars of the back piazza. Hand over hand, stepped across the roof and swung himself into her balcony, saying as he landed on the wide balustrade, "Have you any doubts about me now, ma'am?" Rose was so taken aback, she could only answer with a smile as she went to meet him. "How does my girl do this morning?" he asked, taking the little cold hand she gave him in both his big warm ones. "Pretty well, thank you, sir." "Ah, but it should be very well. Why isn't it?" "I always wake up with a headache and feel tired." "Don't you sleep well?" "I lie awake a long time, and then I dream, and my sleep does not seem to rest me much." "What do you do all day?" "Oh, I read and sew a little, and take naps, and sit with Auntie." "No running about out of doors, or housework, or writing, hey?" "Aunt Plenty says I'm not strong enough for much exercise. I drive out with her sometimes, but I don't care for it." "I'm not surprised at that," said Uncle Alec, half to himself, adding in his quick way, "Who have you had to play with?" "No one but Annabel Bliss, and she was such a goose. I couldn't bear her. The boys came yesterday, and seemed rather nice, but of course I couldn't play with them." "Why not?" "I'm too old to play with boys." "Not a bit of it. That's just what you need, for you've been mollycoddled too much. They are good lads, and you'll be mixed up with them more or less for years to come, so you may as well be friends and playmates at once. I will look you up some girls also, if I can find a sensible one who is not spoiled by her nonsensical education." "Phoebe is sensible, I'm sure, and I like her, though I only saw her yesterday," cried Rose, waking up suddenly. "And who is Phoebe, if you please?" Rose eagerly told all she knew, and Uncle Alec listened with an odd smile lurking about his mouth, though his eyes were quite sober as he watched the face before him. "I'm glad to see that you are not aristocratic in your tastes, but I don't quite make out why you like this young lady from the poorhouse." "You may laugh at me, but I do. I can't tell why, only she seems so happy and busy and sings so beautifully, and is strong enough to scrub and sweep and hasn't any troubles to plague her," said Rose, making a funny jumble of reasons in her efforts to explain. "How do you know that?" "Oh, I was telling her about mine, and asked if she had any, and she said, 'No, only I'd like to go to school, and I mean to some day.'" "So she doesn't call desertion, poverty, and hard work troubles." "She's a brave little girl, and I shall be proud to know her." And Uncle Alec gave an approving nod that made Rose wish she had been the one to earn it. "But what are these troubles of yours, child?" he asked after a minute of silence. "Please don't ask me, Uncle." "Can't you tell them to me as well as to Phoebe?" Something in his tone made Rose feel that it would be better to speak out and be done with it, so she answered with a sudden color and averted eyes, "The greatest one was losing dear papa." As she said that, Uncle Alec's arm came gently round her, and he drew her to him, saying in the voice so like papa's, "That is the trouble which I cannot cure, my child, but I shall try to make you feel it less. What else, dear?" "I am so tired and poorly all the time, I can't do anything I want to, and it makes me cross," sighed Rose, rubbing the aching head like a fretful child. "That we can cure, and we will," said her uncle, with a decided nod that made the curls bob on his head so that Rose saw the gray ones underneath the brown. "Aunt Myra says I have no constitution, never shall be strong," observed Rose in a pensive tone, as if it was rather a nice thing to be an invalid. "Aunt Myra is an excellent woman, but it is her hobby to believe that everyone is tottering on the brink of the grave, and upon my life I believe she is offended if people don't fall into it. We shall show her how to make constitutions and turn pale-faced little ghosts into rosy, hearty girls. That's my business, you know," he added more quietly, for his sudden outburst had rather startled Rose. "I had forgotten you were a doctor. I'm glad of it, for I do want to be well. Only I hope you won't give me much medicine, for I've taken quarts already, and it does me no good." As she spoke, Rose pointed to a little table just inside the window on which appeared a regiment of bottles. "Aha! Now we'll see what mischiefs these blessed women have been at." And making a long arm, Dr. Alex set the bottles on the wide railing before him, examined each carefully, smiled over some, frowned over others, and said as he put down the last, "Now I'll show you the best way to take these messes." And as quick as a flash he sent one after another smashing down into the posy beds below. "But Aunt Plenty won't like it, and Aunt Myra will be angry, for she sent most of them," cried Rose, half frightened and half pleased at such energetic measures. "You are my patient now, and I'll take the responsibility. My way of giving physic is evidently the best, for you look better already," he said, laughing so infectiously that Rose followed suit, saying saucily, "If I don't like your medicines any better than those, I shall throw them into the garden, and then what will you do?" "When I prescribe such rubbish, I'll give you leave to pitch it overboard as soon as you like. Now what is the next trouble?" "I hoped you would forget to ask." "But how can I help you if I don't know them? Come, let us have number 3. It is very wrong, I suppose, but I do sometimes wish I had not quite so many aunts. They are all very good to me, and I want to please them, but they are so different. I feel sort of pulled to pieces among them," said Rose, trying to express the emotions of a stray chicken with 6 hens all clucking over it at once. Uncle Alec threw back his head and laughed like a boy, for he could entirely understand how the good ladies had each put in her oar and tried to paddle her own way, to the great disturbance of the waters and the entire bewilderment of poor Rose. "I intend to try a course of uncles now, and see how that suits your constitution. I'm going to have you all to myself, and no one is going to give a word of advice unless I ask it. There is no other way to keep order aboard, and I am captain of this little craft, for a time at least. What comes next?" But Rose stuck there, and grew so red her uncle guessed what the trouble was. "I don't think I can tell this one. It wouldn't be polite, and I feel pretty sure that it isn't going to be a trouble any more." As she blushed and stammered over these words, Dr. Alec turned his eyes away to the distant sea, and said so seriously, so tenderly, that she felt every word and long remembered them, "My child, I don't expect you to love and trust me all at once, but I do want you to believe that I shall give my whole heart to this new duty, and if I make mistakes, as I probably shall, no one will grieve over them more bitterly than I. It is my fault that I am a stranger to you, when I want to be your best friend. That is one of my mistakes, and I never repented more deeply than I do now. Your father and I had a trouble once, and I thought I never could forgive him, so I kept away for years. Thank God we made it all up the last time I saw him, and he told me that if he was forced to leave her, he should bequeath his little girl to me as a token of his love. I can't fill his place, but I shall try to be a father to her, and if she learns to love me half as well as she did the good one she has lost, I shall be a proud and happy man. Will she believe this, and try?" Something in Uncle Alec's face touched Rose to the heart, and when he held out his hand, with anxious, troubled look in his eyes, she was moved to put her innocent lips and seal the contract with a confiding kiss. The strong arm held her close a minute, and she felt the broad chest heave once, as if with a great sigh of relief, but not a word was spoken, till a tap at the door made both start. Rose popped her head through the window to say, "Come in," while Dr. Alec hastily rubbed the sleeve of his jacket across his eyes and began to whistle again. Phoebe appeared with a cup of coffee. "Debbie told me to bring this up and help you get up," she said, opening her black eyes wide as if she wondered how on earth the sailor man got there. "I'm all dressed, so I don't need any help. I hope that is good and strong," added Rose, eyeing the steaming cup with an eager look. But she did not get it, for a brown hand took possession of it as her uncle said quickly, "Hold hard, my lass, and let me overhaul that dose before you take it. Do you drink all this strong coffee every morning, Rose?" "Yes, sir, and I like it. Auntie says it tones me up, and I always feel better after it." "This accounts for the sleepless nights, the flutter your heart gets into at the least start, and this is why that cheek of yours is pale yellow instead of rosy red. No more coffee for you, my dear, and by you'll see that I am right. Any new milk downstairs, Phoebe?" "Yes, sir, plenty, right in from the barn." "That's the drink for my patient. Go bring me a pitcherful and another cup. I want a draught myself. This won't hurt the honeysuckles, for they have no nerves to speak of." And to Rose's great discomfort, the coffee went after the medicine. Dr. Alec saw the injured look she put on, but took no notice, and presently banished it by saying pleasantly, "I've got a capital little cup among my traps, and I'll give it to you to drink your milk in, as it is made of wood, and that's supposed to improve whatever it is put into it. Something like a quassia cup. That reminds me, one of the boxes Phoebe wanted to lug upstairs last night is for you. Knowing that I was coming home to find a ready-made daughter, I picked up all sorts of odd and pretty trifles along the way, hoping she would be able to find something she liked among them all. Early tomorrow we'll have a grand rummage. Here's our milk. I propose the health of Miss Rose Campbell, and drink it with all my heart." It was impossible for Rose to pout with the prospect of a delightful box full of gifts dancing before her eyes, so in spite of herself she smiled as she drank her own health, and found that fresh milk was not a hard dose to take. "Now, I must be off, before I am caught again with my wig in a toss," said Dr. Alec, preparing to descend the way he came. "Do you always go in and out like a cat, uncle?" asked Rose, much amused at his odd ways. "I used to sneak out of my window when I was a boy, so I need not disturb the ants, and now I rather like it, for it's the shortest road, and it keeps me limber when I have no rigging to climb. Good-bye till breakfast," and away he went down the water-spout, over the roof, and vanished among the budding honeysuckles below. "Ain't he a funny guardian?" exclaimed Phoebe, as she went off with the cups. "He is a very kind one, I think," answered Rose, following to prowl round the big boxes and try to guess which was hers. When her uncle appeared at sound of the bell, he found her surveying with an anxious face a new dish that smoked upon the table. "Got a fresh trouble, Rosie?" he asked, stroking her smooth head. "Uncle, are you going to make me eat oatmeal?" asked Rose in a tragic tone. "Don't you like it?" "I detest it," answered Rose, with all the emphasis which a turned-up nose, a shudder, and a groan could give to the three words. "You are not a true Scotchwoman if you don't like the parritch. It's a pity, for I made it myself, and thought we'd have a good time with all that cream to float in it. Well, Never mind, and he sat down with a disappointed air. Rose had made up her mind to be obstinate about it, because she did heartily detest the dish. But as Uncle Alec did not attempt to make her obey, she suddenly changed her mind and thought she would. "I'll try to eat it to please you, Uncle, but people are always saying how wholesome it is, and that makes me hate it," she said, half ashamed at her silly excuse. "I do want you to like it, because I wish my girl to be as well and strong as Jessie's boys, who are brought up on this good old-fashioned. No hot bread and fried stuff for them, and they are the biggest and bonniest lads of the lot. Bless you, Auntie, and good morning." Dr. Alec turned to greet the old lady, and with a firm resolve to eat or die in the attempt, Rose sat down. In 5 minutes she forgot what she was eating, so interested was she in the chat that went on. It amused her very much to hear Aunt Plenty call her 40-year-old nephew "my dear boy," and Uncle Alec was so full of lively gossip about all creation in general, and the ant-hill in particular, that the detested porridge vanished without a murmur. "You will go to church with us, I hope, Alec, if you are not too tired," said the old lady, when breakfast was over. "I came all the way from Calcutta for that express purpose, ma'am. Only I must send the sisters a word of my arrival, for they don't expect me till tomorrow, you know, and there will be a row in church if those boys see me without warning. I'll send Ben up the hill, and you can step over to Myra's yourself. It will please her, and you will have plenty of time." Dr. Alec was off at once, and they saw no more of him till the old barouche was at the door, and Aunt Plenty just rustling downstairs in her Sunday best, with Rose like a black shadow behind her. Away they drove in state, and all the way Uncle Alec's hat was more off his head than on, for everyone they met smiled and bowed, and gave him as blithe a greeting as the day permitted. It was evident that the warning had been a wise one, for, in spite of time and place, the lads were in such a ferment that their elders sat in momentary dread of an unseemly outbreak somewhere. It was simply impossible to keep those 14 eyes off Uncle Alec, and the dreadful things that were done during sermon time will hardly be believed. Rose dared not look up after a while, for these bad boys vented their emotions upon her till she was ready to laugh and cry with mingled amusement and vexation. Charlie winked rapturously at her behind his mother's fan. Mac openly pointed to the tall figure beside her. Jamie stared fixedly over the back of his pew till Rose thought his round eyes would drop out of his head. George fell over a stool and dropped 3 books in his excitement. Will drew sailors and Chinamen on his clean cuffs and displayed them, to Rose's great tribulation. Steve nearly upset the whole party by burning his nose with salts as he pretended to be overcome by his joy. Even dignified Archie disgraced himself by writing his hymn book, "Isn't he blue and brown?" and passing it politely to Rose. Her only salvation was trying to fix her attention upon Uncle Mac, a portly, placid gentleman who seemed entirely unconscious of the iniquities of the clan, and dozed peacefully in his pew corner. This was the only uncle Rose had met for years, for Uncle Jem and Uncle Steve, the husbands of Aunt Jessie and Aunt Clara, were at sea, and Aunt Myra was a widow. Uncle Mac was a merchant, very rich and busy, and as quiet as a mouse at home, for he was in such a minority among the womenfolk he dared not open his lips and let his wife rule undisturbed. Rose liked the big, kindly, silent man who came to her when Papa died, was always sending her splendid boxes of goodies at school, and often invited her to his great warehouse, full of teas and spices, wines, and all sorts of foreign fruits, there to eat and carry away whatever she liked. She had secretly regretted that he was not to be her guardian, but since she had seen Uncle Alec she felt better about it, for she did not particularly admire Aunt Jane. When church was over, Dr. Alec got into the porch as quickly as possible, and there the young bears had a hug all around while the sisters shook hands and welcomed him with bright faces and glad hearts. Rose was nearly crushed flat behind a door in that dangerous passage from pew to porch, but Uncle Mac rescued her and put her into the carriage for safe keeping. Now, girls, I want you all to come and dine with Alec. Mac also, of course. But I cannot ask the boys, for we did not expect this dear fellow till tomorrow, you know, so I made no preparations. Send the lads home and let them wait till Monday, for really I was shocked at their behavior in church, said Aunt Plenty as she followed Rose. In any other place the defrauded boys would have set up a howl. As it was, they growled and protested till Dr. Alec settled the matter by saying, "Never mind, old chaps, I'll make it up to you tomorrow. If you sheer off quietly, if you don't, not a blessed thing shall you have out of my big boxes."